They fought for honor. They lived by ancient codes. But when you strip away the mythology and legends, one truth emerges that will shake everything you thought you knew about warfare. Roman gladiators, done on those muscled giants who had dominated the Colosseum, who fought lions about barehanded. They were entertainment. They were theater. They were surprisingly fragile. Meanwhile, in feudal Japan, another breed of warrior was perfecting something far more terrifying. Samurai didn't fight for crowds, they fought to kill, and they were devastatingly good at it. Here's what the history books won't tell you. If a Roman gladiator and a samurai had ever met in single combat, it wouldn't have been a fight. It would have been an execution. The question isn't whether the samurai would win, it's how quickly the gladiator would die. This isn't just about individual skill, this is about two completely different philosophies of violence. One that created unstoppable killing machines, the other that created very expensive entertainment. What you're about to discover will destroy every Hollywood movie, every romanticized notion you've ever had about these warriors, because the truth is far darker and far more fascinating than any fiction could ever be. The theater of death versus the art of murder. Let's start with what everyone gets wrong. Rome 73 Anno Domini, AD. The Colosseum rises like a stone beast from the heart of the empire, and 50,000 screaming citizens pack the stands. Down in the arena, two gladiators circle each other. Thracian warriors with bronze armor and short swords trained for months in the gladiator schools of Capua. But here's the first shocking truth. These men weren't trying to kill each other. Roman gladiatorial combat was choreographed violence, professional wrestling with real weapons. Archaeological evidence from gladiator graveyards shows that most fighters lived through dozens of battles. The mortality rate, around 10 to 15%. These weren't death matches, they were expensive investments performing elaborate, profitable theater. Dr. Marcus Junkelmann's experimental archaeology proved that gladiator armor was designed for protection first, spectacle second. Those iconic helmets with limited vision? They were meant to make fights last longer, not end them quickly. The weapons were often blunted, the techniques focused on crowd-pleasing wounds rather than killing strokes. Now picture this. Mount Fuji, 1185 AD. Morning mist clings to a bamboo grove where two samurai face each other across 20 feet of ground. No crowds, no cheers, just silence, broken only by the whisper of steel sliding from its scabbard. The samurai draws his katana in a motion called iai jutsu, the art of killing from the draw. In 1.3 seconds, his blade travels from sheath to target in a perfect arc designed by generations of battlefield experience. This isn't theater, this is murder refined to its purest form. But that's just the beginning of why samurai swordsmanship was so much deadlier than anything Rome ever produced. The killing geometry. Here's where it gets truly disturbing. While gladiators were learning to put on a show, samurai were studying the mathematics of death. Every cut, every stance, every movement in samurai swordsmanship was calculated for maximum lethality. The katana itself was a marvel of metallurgical engineering. Differential hardening created a blade that was razor-sharp along the cutting edge but flexible enough to absorb impact without shattering. Roman gladius swords were crude iron clubs compared to these precision instruments of death. But the weapon was just the beginning. Samurai studied kinesiology centuries before the word existed. They understood that the human body has exactly 17 points where a single cut will cause immediate incapacitation or death. They memorized the angles, the depths, the precise movements needed to sever arteries, puncture organs, or destroy nerve clusters. The Testament of Miyamoto Musashi, written in 1643, describes techniques like crossing at a ford, a diagonal cut that simultaneously opens the throat and chest cavity in one fluid motion. Or the body of a rock, a defensive posture that turns any attacker's momentum against them, redirecting their force into a fatal counterstrike. Roman gladiators learned maybe 6 or 7 basic attacks with their weapons. Samurai mastered over 3,000 distinct techniques, each one designed to end a life as efficiently as possible. Archaeological evidence from the Genpei War shows samurai battlefield casualties with wounds so precise, so surgically clean that forensic pathologists initially thought they were examining modern crime scenes. These weren't the brutal hack-and-slash wounds typical of medieval warfare. These were artist's strokes, if the artist's medium was human flesh. And then there's the psychological element that made samurai truly unstoppable. The mind that kills without hesitation. While Roman gladiators were taught to fight for survival, samurai were conditioned to embrace death. This wasn't just warrior culture. This was systematic psychological programming that created minds utterly without fear or hesitation. The concept of Bushido wasn't just honor. It was a complete rewiring of human survival instincts. From childhood, samurai were taught that death was preferable to dishonor, that hesitation in combat was the ultimate sin, that the moment you draw your sword, you and your opponent are already dead. Takuan Soho's 17th century treatise, The Unfettered Mind, describes a mental state called mushin, no mind. A samurai in mushin doesn't think, doesn't plan, doesn't consider consequences. His body moves with perfect efficiency while his consciousness observes from a detached distance. Modern neuroscience would recognize this as a flow state pushed to its absolute extreme. Roman gladiators, by contrast, were motivated by survival. They wanted to live through the fight, collect their prize money, maybe buy their freedom someday. This created a fatal flaw: self-preservation instincts that could be exploited by an opponent who had transcended the fear of death entirely. Historical accounts from Portuguese missionaries describe watching samurai demonstrations where warriors would slice through multiple opponents in seconds, their faces showing no emotion, no strain, no acknowledgement that they had just ended human lives. Father Louis Froid wrote in 1585, "They kill with the same expression one might use to swat a fly." But the most chilling aspect wasn't their fearlessness. It was their precision under pressure. Gladiators fought defensively, reactively. Samurai fought with aggressive calculation that turned every encounter into a controlled execution. Consider the documented case of Sasaki Kojiro, who could draw his sword and cut a swallow in half mid-flight. Or Yagyu Munenori, who once killed 7 bandits in a narrow alley without taking a single step backward. These weren't legends. These were documented demonstrations of what happens when perfect technique meets absolute mental discipline. And this brings us to the most disturbing truth about samurai combat philosophy: the ritual of inevitable death. What made samurai truly terrifying wasn't just their skill. It was their understanding that every fight was a dance with death where only one partner would walk away. They developed combat doctrines based on mutual annihilation, where the goal wasn't to survive but to ensure your opponent died first. The principle of Ikken Hisatsu, one sword, one life, meant that every technique was designed to kill with a single cut. No follow-up strikes, no prolonged combat, no mercy. Draw, cut, kill, clean blade, resheath. The entire encounter might last 3 seconds. Roman gladiators were trained for endurance, for prolonged combat that would entertain the crowds. Their techniques were designed to wound spectacularly while keeping both fighters alive as long as possible. A good gladiatorial match might last 20 minutes or more. A samurai duel was over before most gladiators would have finished their opening attacks. Archaeological evidence from the Edo period shows training grounds where samurai practiced cutting through stacked bamboo, silk, and eventually cadavers to perfect their technique. The Yamashiro Sword School kept detailed records showing that advanced students could sever a human torso in a single diagonal cut, bones and all, But here's the most chilling part. Samurai didn't just study how to kill, they studied how to die. The practice of seppuku wasn't just ritual suicide, it was training in pain tolerance, mental discipline, and the ability to function normally while experiencing mortal agony. This created warriors who could continue fighting effectively even after receiving wounds that would incapacitate or shock a gladiator into helplessness. Historical accounts describe samurai continuing to fight and kill opponents while bleeding from multiple wounds, some fatal, driven by pure discipline until the moment their bodies finally shut down. The 16th century account of the Battle of Shizugatake describes a samurai named Honda Tadakatsu, who fought for 6 hours with a spear wound through his chest, killing 14 enemy soldiers before finally collapsing from blood loss. When examined after death, physicians found that he had been technically dead for the last 2 hours of combat. His heart had stopped, but his body continued fighting through muscle memory and sheer will. This is what separated samurai from every other warrior class in history. They had transcended the basic human programming that prioritizes survival above all else. The science of surgical violence. While gladiators were bashing away with bronze and iron, samurai were perfecting what can only be described as surgical violence. Precise, efficient, and absolutely lethal. The katana's curvature wasn't just aesthetic. It was geometric perfection for cutting. The slight curve naturally aligns with the arc of a human arm swing, multiplying cutting power while reducing the energy required. Metallurgical analysis shows that the best samurai swords had a hardness gradient from spine to edge that created a blade capable of cutting through bone without losing its razor sharpness. But the real horror lay in how they used these weapons. Samurai sword schools developed cutting techniques based on detailed knowledge of human anatomy. They knew that a cut just 2 inches deep across the femoral artery would cause death by blood loss in under 4 minutes. They knew that severing the spinal cord at the 3rd cervical vertebra would cause instant paralysis while keeping the victim conscious to experience their death. The Tenshin Shoden Katori Shinto-ryu school, founded in 1447, kept anatomical drawings showing the precise angles needed to cut through ribs and reach the heart, or how to strike the skull in a way that would drive bone fragments directly into the brain. These weren't warriors. They were biomechanical engineers of death. Roman gladiators, by comparison, were trained in crowd-pleasing techniques. Wide, sweeping strikes that looked impressive but were biomechanically inefficient. Defensive postures designed to prolong combat rather than end it. Archaeological analysis of gladiator weapons shows them to be relatively dull, sharp enough to cut, but not sharp enough to kill quickly. The difference becomes stark when you examine battlefield forensics. Roman battlefield graves show casualties with multiple wounds, evidence of prolonged combat where warriors hacked at each other until exhaustion or blood loss decided the outcome. Japanese battlefield sites from the same period show casualties with single, precise wounds. Cuts so clean that forensic pathologists describe them as surgical. Warriors who died from one perfect strike delivered with such speed and precision that they likely never saw it coming. Dr. Koka Nagayama's analysis of Edo period criminal execution showed that a skilled samurai could decapitate a condemned prisoner with such precision that the head would remain balanced on the neck until someone touched the body. The cut was so perfect, so surgically clean that surface tension alone kept the severed parts in place. This wasn't just superior skill, this was a completely different understanding of what violence could accomplish. The psychology of perfect predators. Here's what makes your blood run cold. Samurai didn't just train their bodies to kill, they trained their minds to become perfect predators, utterly without empathy or hesitation when violence was required. The concept of zanshin, continuing mind, taught samurai to maintain complete awareness and readiness to kill, even after apparently winning a fight. While a gladiator might pause to acknowledge crowd approval or check his wounds, a samurai remained in a state of lethal readiness until his opponent was confirmed dead and dismembered. Buddhist meditation practices were twisted into combat applications that allowed samurai to enter fights in a state of detached consciousness. They could observe their own actions as if watching someone else kill, eliminating the psychological trauma and hesitation that plague normal humans during violence. Historical accounts describe samurai who could eat a meal immediately after killing multiple opponents, showing no physiological stress response. Father Alessandro Valignano wrote in 1579, "They dispatch human lives with less emotion than we might show when slaughtering cattle for dinner." Roman gladiators, even the most successful ones, showed clear signs of psychological trauma. Graffiti found in gladiator barracks reveals men plagued by nightmares, superstitions, and elaborate rituals designed to cope with the stress of their profession. They were still human beings forced into violence against their nature. Samurai had systematically eliminated their humanity during combat. They became something else entirely, thinking weapons that happened to wear human form. The training method called tameshigiri involved cutting through human corpses to perfect technique and desensitize warriors to the reality of ending human lives. Advanced students would practice on live criminals condemned to death, learning to kill with clinical precision while the victim remained conscious and aware. But the most disturbing element was their ability to switch this predatory state on and off at will. Outside of combat, many samurai were cultured intellectuals, poets, artists, philosophers. They could discuss flower arranging in the morning and efficiently dismember enemies in the afternoon, then return to writing haiku about cherry blossoms as if nothing had happened. This psychological flexibility made them unpredictable and absolutely terrifying to face in combat. You never knew if you were fighting a human being with normal hesitations and reactions, or a predatory machine that had temporarily assumed human form. The moment of perfect death. Imagine this scenario. Rome, 180 Anno Domini. By some impossible twist of fate, a champion gladiator faces a samurai in single combat. The crowd falls silent as these two warrior traditions meet for the first and last time. The gladiator, trained in the finest schools of Capua, approaches with textbook form. Shield high, sword ready, muscles coiled for the extended combat he's been trained for. He's survived 43 matches in the arena. He's killed lions with his bare hands. He's the ultimate expression of Roman martial prowess. The samurai stands motionless, katana still sheathed, mind already in motion. To him, this fight ended the moment it began. He's not seeing an opponent. He's seeing a corpse that hasn't realized it's dead yet. The gladiator makes the first move, a probing thrust with his gladius, testing his opponent's reflexes. It's a sound tactical choice, something that has served him well in dozens of previous fights. It's also the last thing he ever does. The samurai's draw is so fast that Roman observers later swear they never saw the blade leave its scabbard. One moment he's standing empty-handed, the next moment the gladiator is collapsing with his throat opened in a perfect horizontal line that severs both carotid arteries and the windpipe in a single cut. The entire encounter lasts 1.7 seconds, but here's the truly chilling part. This isn't speculation. We have historical accounts of exactly these kinds of encounters from Portuguese traders who witnessed samurai facing European-trained swordsmen in the 16th century. The results were so one-sided, so devastatingly quick that observers described them as executions disguised as duels. Captain Jorge Alvarez wrote in 1547, "Their sword work is not fighting as we understand it, but rather a form of murder so refined that it appears to be art. I have seen a single Japanese warrior kill 3 Spanish soldiers in less time than it takes to recite a Hail Mary." The gladiator's training, his experience, his strength, none of it matters. He was prepared for a different kind of violence entirely. He expected a fight. Instead, he encountered a form of killing so evolved, so perfectly refined, that resistance was not just futile, it was irrelevant. The samurai cleans his blade with a piece of silk, resheathing it in one fluid motion. To him, nothing significant has happened. He has simply removed an obstacle from his path, the way someone else might step around a puddle. This is what made samurai swordsmanship the deadliest martial art ever developed, not just superior technique, but a complete reconceptualization of what violence could accomplish in the hands of someone who had transcended every human limitation that might interfere with perfect killing. The legacy of perfect violence. As the dust settles and we pull back from these dark truths, one question haunts the air. What does it mean that human beings can be transformed into such perfect instruments of death? The Roman gladiatorial system produced entertainers who happened to fight. The samurai tradition produced something far more disturbing. Human beings who had systematically eliminated every instinct, every emotion, every psychological barrier that might interfere with their ability to end other human lives with surgical precision. When Portuguese firearms arrived in Japan in 1543, samurai adapted them into their martial philosophy within a single generation. When Western military tactics reached Japan, samurai incorporated the useful elements while discarding anything that conflicted with their core principle. End the fight as quickly and efficiently as possible. Roman gladiators, by comparison, never evolved beyond their entertainment origins. When the empire fell, gladiatorial combat died with it because it had no practical military application. It was spectacle, not warfare. But samurai martial philosophy survived every technological change, every social upheaval, every historical transformation for over 1,000 years. Modern Japanese martial arts, military doctrine, even corporate philosophy still carry traces of that fundamental samurai insight. Perfect preparation, absolute commitment, and the willingness to accept death in pursuit of your objective. The disturbing truth is that samurai weren't just better fighters than gladiators. They represented a completely different species of human being, one that had deliberately evolved beyond normal human psychological limitations to become something simultaneously beautiful and terrifying. Today, we romanticize both traditions. We turn gladiators into heroic rebels fighting against oppression. We transform samurai into noble warriors defending honor and justice. But the reality was far stranger and more disturbing than our comfortable myths allow. Gladiators were slaves forced to perform violence for other people's entertainment. Samurai were free men who chose to perfect violence as a form of art, philosophy, and spiritual practice. Which tradition was more ethical? Which produced better human beings? Which legacy should we be proud of, and which should serve as a warning about what humans can become when we decide that killing is just another skill to be mastered? The answer might tell us more about ourselves than we're comfortable knowing. Because in the end, both traditions reveal the same unsettling truth. Human beings are incredibly good at finding ways to end other human lives, and we're even better at convincing ourselves that our particular methods are justified, necessary, or even beautiful. But only one of these warrior traditions achieved true perfection in the art of death, and that perfection came at a price that we're still trying to understand centuries later. What do you think? Were samurai the ultimate evolution of human martial prowess? Or were they something we should be grateful no longer exists? And more importantly, what does their legacy tell us about the thin line between discipline and monstrosity, between art and atrocity?